September 7th, 1191. 12,000 crusaders, battered, bloodied, pushed beyond human endurance after 7 days of ceaseless torment, turned and obliterated 30,000 of Saladin's finest warriors in exactly 17 minutes. 17 minutes. Less time than it takes to pray the rosary. In that impossible span, 7,000 Muslim soldiers died, while Crusader losses barely reached 700. A 10-to-1 kill ratio that shattered every law of medieval warfare and broke the myth of Saladin's invincibility forever. The fate of the Holy Land, perhaps all of Christendom's presence in the East, hung on a single cavalry charge unleashed at the perfect moment. You're about to witness how Richard the Lionheart orchestrated the most devastating counterattack in crusading history through a weapon deadlier than any lance or sword discipline forged in 7 days of deliberate suffering. But here's what the chronicles hide beneath their pious Latin. Richard had been waiting for this exact moment through 7 agonizing days of watching his men die unavenged. Why did he force exhausted knights to endure when they could have charged? How could warriors who'd marched through desert heat in 40 pounds of chainmail suddenly explode with such devastating force? And why did Saladin's battle-hardened veterans men who'd conquered Jerusalem itself flee from an army they outnumbered more than 2-to-1? Jerusalem itself hung in the balance that September morning as 2 of history's greatest military minds played a deadly chess match on the coastal plains. Richard had just secured Acre after a brutal 2-year siege. The Lionheart King of England, Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou, stood as Christendom's greatest warrior king at 33 years old. But across the dusty plains waited his match in every way. Saladin, the Kurdish Sultan, whose very name meant righteousness of the faith, the man who'd recaptured Jerusalem and shattered Crusader power at the catastrophic Battle of Hattin just 4 years earlier. This wasn't merely a clash between armies. It was a collision between 2 military philosophies, 2 faiths, and 2 commanders who respected each other even as they sought the other's destruction. After Hattin in 1187, where Saladin had annihilated the Crusader army and captured the True Cross itself, the Islamic world believed the Frankish threat was finished forever. Jerusalem had fallen in triumph. The coastal cities surrendered one by one. Christianity's century-old presence in the Holy Land seemed doomed to extinction. Then came the Third Crusade, and with it, Richard the Lionheart. The 33-year-old English king had already proven himself Europe's finest military mind through campaigns in France. But Saladin at 53 commanded an empire stretching from Egypt through Syria. With decades of hard-won experience fighting Frankish knights, he knew their devastating strength, the heavy cavalry charge that could shatter any formation. And he knew their fatal weaknesses: desert heat, battlefield impatience, and the crushing burden of their own armor under the merciless sun. After taking Acre through siege warfare, Richard faced a critical strategic decision: march inland directly toward Jerusalem through hostile territory, or secure the coastal route first while keeping his fleet close for supplies and retreat. He chose the conservative path southward along the Mediterranean toward Jaffa, 80 miles of exposed coastal road. It seemed safe, logical, predictable to outside observers. Saladin smiled when his scouts reported Richard's choice. The Sultan had been planning for exactly this decision, had prepared the coastal route as a killing ground. The road from Acre to Jaffa passed through perfect ambush country, rolling hills on the left providing cover for cavalry, the sea on the right blocking escape. No room to maneuver sideways, nowhere to run except forward or back. The Crusaders would be trapped in a narrow corridor of death. But here's what makes this confrontation extraordinary. These commanders weren't merely generals, but students of each other's methods. Richard had studied every battle Saladin had won, interrogated survivors from Hattin, learned from Crusader mistakes. Saladin had questioned captured knights extensively about Richard's European tactics. Each knew the other's playbook intimately. What followed would transcend simple battle to become a masterclass in patience, psychological warfare, and the art of springing a trap on someone who knows it's coming. As August turned to September, 30,000 Muslim warriors gathered in the hills shadowing the coastal road. Richard's 12,000 men began their march south, knowing full well what awaited them in those hills. The armies that gathered represented medieval warfare's absolute pinnacle. Richard's force of 12,000 was small but represented elite quality. At its core stood 2,000 mounted knights, 300 Hospitallers forming the vanguard, 300 Templars guarding the rear. These warrior monks possessed legendary discipline born of religious vows. The remaining 1,400 knights came from England, France, Normandy, and the Crusader states. Each knight was a walking fortress, 40 pounds of chainmail covering his body, massive helm protecting his head, kite shield on his arm, 12-foot lance, and broadsword at his side. Supporting these armored juggernauts marched 10,000 infantry half-spearmen carrying shields to form defensive walls, half-crossbowmen whose steel-tipped bolts could punch through Muslim armor at 200 yards. But their greatest asset wasn't weapons or armor. It was formation discipline. Richard had drilled them relentlessly in a defensive arrangement that moved like a single living organism. Shields overlapping, spears bristling outward, crossbowmen protected in the center, able to fire from safety. Saladin's host of 30,000 was built for entirely different purposes, mobility and harassment warfare. His core consisted of 10,000 Mamluk heavy cavalry slave soldiers taken as boys, trained from childhood to be the finest horsemen in the Islamic world. They wore lighter armor than Crusader knights, leather and mail designed for speed rather than prolonged close combat. Their primary weapons were composite bows capable of loosing 12 arrows per minute and curved sabers for slashing attacks. Most crucially, each Mamluk had 3 or 4 fresh horses, allowing constant rotation. The remaining 20,000 comprised mixed forces, Bedouin light cavalry for scouting and flanking, Turkish horse archers whose skills were legendary, Kurdish infantry, and Egyptian regulars. But Saladin's real weapons were psychological drums and cymbals to unnerve enemies, dust clouds to obscure vision and exaggerate numbers, and the constant rain of arrows designed to break resolve over days rather than minutes. The killing ground near Arsuf offered everything the Sultan needed for his strategy. The ancient Roman road ran just 2 miles from the Mediterranean, bordered by sand dunes and scrubland, providing perfect cover for ambush. To the east rose the forested hills of Samaria, where Muslim cavalry could mass unseen, then strike. The Crusaders would march through a 10-mile gauntlet, with the sea blocking any retreat on their right and Saladin's army pressing from their left. The heat alone was a weapon deadlier than steel. September in the Levant meant temperatures exceeding 115 degrees. Every Crusader carried at least 40 pounds of metal armor that would become a baking oven under the desert sun. Water was strictly rationed. The nearest safe wells lay in hostile territory controlled by Muslim forces. Richard understood the brutal mathematics of attrition with perfect clarity. Each day of marching in full armor drained strength exponentially. Each hour under arrow fire tested discipline to breaking point. Saladin was betting that Crusaders would break formation to charge their tormentors, and in open ground his lighter cavalry would cut the scattered knights to pieces. This tactic had worked perfectly at Hattin. It had worked against every Frankish army for decades. On September 3rd, as Richard's column departed Acre, Muslim outriders appeared on the eastern hills like circling vultures. The deadly chess match had begun with every piece positioned. What Richard did next defied every conventional rule of medieval warfare and seemed like pure madness. Instead of rushing to cover the 80 miles to Jaffa as quickly as possible, he ordered a glacial pace of just 10 miles per day. A 3-day march stretched deliberately to 8 days of exposure. It seemed insane, giving Saladin more time to gather additional forces, more opportunities to attack, more days for his men to suffer and die. The sun rose on September 3rd, bringing the first whistling death from the hills. Arrows arced in constant drizzle, not concentrated volleys meant to destroy, but maddening harassment designed to torment and break spirits. Saladin's horse archers swept close, loosed their shafts, wheeled away before Crusader crossbowmen could respond effectively. This wasn't meant to annihilate the Crusaders. It was designed to drive them mad with impotent rage. Richard's response revealed his tactical genius to those who understood. The army moved in 3 parallel columns. Hospitallers leading in the vanguard, the royal standard in the center with Richard himself visible, Templars guarding the vulnerable rear. The baggage train crawled between the infantry and the sea, protected on all sides. Most crucially, the knights stayed mounted but didn't charge, despite every warrior instinct screaming for action. They endured arrows, insults, and the agonizing sight of brothers dying unavenged. Day 2 brought calculated escalation in the harassment.
Let the negotiations proceed. My patience, however, is not infinite.